Wake up. It's the Sleep Unplugged podcast, episode 112, Sleepwalking. To get up and go, memories remote. Now I'm standing up the morning after. Welcome, everyone, to the Sleep Unplugged podcast. My name is Chris Winter. I'm a neurologist and sleep specialist and your host for this episode of the podcast that is way overdue. In fact, in a recent episode, I mentioned sleepwalking and was about to say, and if you want more information about sleepwalking, you can refer back to such and such episode. And I kind of caught myself because I realized I don't think there is an episode of sleepwalking. We've gone 111 episodes and not talked about sleepwalking. And that's the danger I am discovering doing a podcast that's been around for over 2 years, which is I'm forgetting what I've spoken about in the past, not only in terms of little anecdotes and stories, but also in terms of entire topics. So we are going to remedy that today. So, welcome to the podcast. If you're new, welcome to our family. If you're a veteran, welcome back. We're glad you're here. It's been a busy week cleaning up after Hurricane Debbie. I did take a trip, and thankfully, the travel worked out. I got to go out to Ohio and spend some time with the University of Toledo's football team, who coming off an amazing season last year. I spoke to them about 4 or 5 years ago, and their coach called me up and said, "Hey, we've got a whole group of players here that have never spoken to you. Would love for you to come out." So I really appreciate the University of Toledo. They are the Rockets, their hospitality. If you go on my Instagram page, it might still be up. I can't remember if it was a story or how I posted, but I posted a picture outside of one of my favorite things related to college sports, which is the Toledo Rockets have an actual rocket outside of their stadium. I think it's called the Glass Bowl. And my father, who played football at Marshall, actually played at the Glass Bowl when he was a Marshall University football player. That aside, I was mentioning, I said, "Oh, that's really cool. Y'all have this, rocket, outside of your stadium." And I think it was donated by the Army. It's obviously not functional. However, it has been aimed, and the legend has it that if the rocket were to somehow launch, it would point directly to the stadium of their arch rival Bowling Green, which I think is hilarious that the rocket is actually aimed for their rival. So thank you very much to the people at the University of Toledo. Also, thank you to the Attorney General of Ohio and their Bureau of Crime Scene Investigation. I came out for 2 days and did some lectures across the state for all the men and women who are investigating crimes in the state of Ohio. They get called out late at night to investigate crimes and collect evidence from crime scenes. So they have a lot of sleep issues. And they were asked by their leaders, "Hey, what information do you want? What would be helpful to you to do better at your work, lead a better life, be healthier?" And a lot of them said, "We want more information about sleep." So it was really fun to go out there and do some education with them and get them all tuned up. So thank you guys for your hospitality as well too. So comments, corrections, criticisms, I think we'll skip that and go to our lucid dream experiment. So last week, we did our second lucid dream experiment all this week, even when I was in Ohio. And even when I fell asleep on the plane, I really worked on lucid dreaming myself in front of the Eiffel Tower holding an object. And your job was to lucid dream, go to the Eiffel Tower, find me, look at me, and see if you see me holding something, and then report back to me what I'm holding. And I got a lot of great information: television set, gold medal, donuts. There was a bunch of them. There was a let's see, um, my book. Uh, there was a tools like a hammer were very common, but nobody got the answer for the second annual Lucid Dream experiment. This year, I was holding. Last year was I think it was an apple. This year, I was holding a pepperoni pizza in a box. So I had the box in my hand open So anybody who would walk up to me would see that there was a pepperoni pizza inside the box. I thought that would be kind of a funny thing to be holding when you're in Paris, France. And I thought not entirely logical. The baguette might be more likely, or the croque monsieur. So nobody got it this year, but we will try again next year, and we'll find a fun place a landmark, and we'll all try to meet up with our lucid dreaming experiment there. So before we get going, you can find me on social media, Dr. Chris Winter, Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter, Twitter, Dr. Chris Winter, spot TikTok, Bluesky, Threads. We have a YouTube page where we put all of our content on there. You can always communicate with the show through DM messages, direct messages through our social media, but also through the message app on YouTube. We have a Spotify playlist where we put all the music that we feature in the show. So we always have some musical reference in the title of the show. And this week, we are setting a record, thinking again about the Olympics and record setting. This week, we're setting a record with 3 references from the same artist in the title. And the artist is one of my favorites, the late, great Elliott Smith, who burst onto the scene after his 3rd album was discovered by Gus Van Sant, and several of the songs from that 1997 album, Either Or, found their way onto the Good Will Hunting soundtrack. And so To Get Up and Go is from the song Bottle Up and Explode off his 1998 album XO. Memories Remote from the song Waltz Number 2 off of XO, which was actually in Good Will Hunting, and I believe, and then also Say Yes was also from the movie Good Will Hunting, and that's the Now I'm Standing Up the Morning After. Fantastic artist, a great listen when you're in a particular mood, and the music community lost a great one when he passed away at such a young age. So, Bottle Up, XO, Either Or, and Figure Eight are 3 just outstanding albums if you haven't heard them. So let's get into Sleepwalking, sometimes called somnambulism, sometimes called noctambulism. So noctambulism would be sleepwalking specifically that is happening at night. Somnambulism is walking or movement that's happening when an individual is simply asleep. So theoretically, a shift worker who goes to bed at 8 a.m. and sleepwalks is experiencing somnambulism, but not noctambulism. An individual who is sleepwalking at night is experiencing both somnambulism and noctambulism. It's like the square is a rectangle, but the rectangle is not a square. So what are some characteristics of sleepwalking? It's a parasomnia, and we have talked a lot about parasomnias on this show. We've talked about somniloquy or sleep talking, sleep related eating. We've talked about sleepy sex. All these things are characterized as behaviors that are arising out of sleep, and parasomnia is one of them. It typically arises out of some sort of arousal in deep sleep. And when we think about the changes we see in sleep as an individual matures, and we've talked about this in the episode 109, Sleep in the Elderly, do we sleep less as we get older? My contention is that we do. And it has a lot to do with the fact that we are gradually losing deep sleep. So if you look at the percentage of deep sleep in a young person, it is very high, baby, very high. And as that individual matures, sleep need drops as deep sleep seems to drop. So likewise, the amount of individuals who have sleepwalking seems to decrease as people get older, and that percentage of deep sleep goes down. Characteristics of the disorder include the individual obviously getting up, obviously moving, and there's a fairly significant amount of disorientation that goes on. The episodes can last in the range of minutes or generally over within about 30 minutes, much like the stage of deep sleep is not going to last much longer than that in many individuals. Common in young people. Most individuals outgrow it. However, like many parasomnias, that 2 to 4% that persist in adulthood seem to hold up when we're talking about sleepwalking in adults. About 2 to 4% of adults continue to have sleepwalking. And an important question to ask when you're talking about an adult who is sleepwalking is it primary or secondary? Did the sleepwalking that the individual had when they were a kid go away for many years and now suddenly and strangely has come back? Or has that sleepwalking never gone away since the individual was a child? And one individual that I saw sleepwalking as a provider in Charlottesville was a young woman who was at the University of Virginia. She was a freshman, or a first year, as they're called at UVA, because Thomas Jefferson considered nobody to be a senior. You were always in the state of learning. So this first year had come from Ohio, where I just came back from, and within, I think, a week or two of getting to school, was found by police kind of walking around in her night clothes, barefoot, no identification, confused, at first thought to be intoxicated. And then the officers actually realized that she was sleepwalking and somehow got her back to her dorm, but not before she found a phone somewhere and called her parents back in Ohio and said, "Can you come get me?" And her dad's on the line, "Honey, who is this? What's going on?" "Oh, just forget about it." And then she hung up. And so it turned out, when I saw her in the clinic and was able to speak with her parents, the parents had sort of a conversation of, "Oh yeah, she does this all the time," which was shocking because they had never sought any treatment for it and just allowed her to go several states away to a college, living in a dorm, thinking that it would just magically stop, which it very much did not. A lot of times these episodes are associated, especially in young people, with night terrors. We talked about that in episode 19 of the show. And the thing that I think is most important to stress about sleepwalking is there is a large body of sort of adjacent legal issues that often go along with this. I was just um, so, sort of an expert witness in a case that fortunately never went to trial, of an individual who was sleepwalking while staying with his son in a hospital and climbed into bed with somebody that he was not related to, just walked into a hospital room and got into bed with somebody. And these are the kinds of things that often happen. When this individual was questioned by the police, he had no memory of what was going on. It all seemed to be kind of bizarre. He was naked when it happened, so he was sleeping in bed with this child who was like in the bone marrow transplant unit or whatever. A tragic story, sleep deprivation for sure, because he's trying to work and be with his son. He's going through this awful medical ordeal. And when the wife got on the scene, or the girlfriend, I should say, the girlfriend said, "Oh, he does this every night." She said to the authorities, "It's very unlikely for him to end up in the bed that he went to sleep in, clothed. He's usually somewhere else in the house, or he's gotten up and taken his clothes off." She says, "I'm in a constant state of kind of beating him off of me all night long, just trying to like get him away from me. He's grabbing me, hugging me too aggressively, talking, moaning, like it's just a lot of things going on." So I think it's important, if you've had episodes, even if they're relatively trivial. I got up and walked outside of a tent one time and fell asleep on a bench, or, I often wake up in the living room, but I have no memory of how I got there. We've talked about sleep related eating. I think if you have those types of things going on in your life, even if they're benign, that is a great thing to make sure you are discussing with your primary care doctor, for two reasons. Number one, you know, are there things that we could do to make you not do those things anymore? Talking to your primary care doctor results in a referral to a sleep medicine specialist, and suddenly you're working on treatments that could make those things less likely, less dangerous, etc. But the other important reason to mention it to people and describe it to people is so there is a medical record of the fact that you do these things in case something unusual happens going into the future. So I think it's really important that that is discussed with your provider. So, what causes these things? Um, it's not entirely known. Genetic causes are thought to play a big role. Somewhere on the order of 45% of children who have a parent that sleepwalks are going to sleepwalk, which is a very high number. So there's clearly some genetic influence when it comes to sleepwalking. Some people believe it might be related to a delay in the maturity of the central nervous system, which is why so many children are having it. So it's this combination of a high amount of deep sleep, but also a nervous system that hasn't matured in a way that it can sort of prevent that. So we think about that when we look at reflexes. If you ever watch a neurologist or specifically a pediatric neurologist evaluate a young child or a baby, they're often looking for reflexes that are there at birth, but as the central nervous system matures, the reflexes disappear. Now, interestingly, when you watch a neurologist or a gerontologist evaluate an elderly individual or maybe somebody with dementia, they're often looking for those same reflexes that reemerge as the brain loses its ability to suppress these reflexes. And we think about that a lot. Of lot of the nervous system functioning in a normal way is the nervous system suppressing movements and reflexes that would be there ordinarily. It's like the brain wants to move, the brain wants to have this abnormal reflex, but higher levels of maturation have resulted in systems that suppress it. When those higher levels of maturation go away through trauma, through cognitive decline, even medications to some extent, these primitive reflexes can be seen again. And so for some people, it's almost like the sleepwalking is there in everyone, but higher level influences prevent it from happening in most people, but not in everyone. We talked about the increased slow wave sleep that you see in individuals who are young because they just have a bigger percentage of deep sleep. But when we think about sleep deprivation, being excessively sleepy, a lot of times what happens is after a couple nights of sleep deprivation, you finally get a chance to sleep longer. You have sort of a rebound effect of certain stages. So, could that rebound of slow wave sleep lead to an individual who has more episodes of sleepwalking? And that makes sense to some extent because when you talk to some people who have episodes of parasomnias or specifically sleepwalking, one thing that I often ask is, how has your stress level been? What's your schedule been like lately? Are you getting enough sleep? It's very likely that these things happen during periods of high stress. Projects are due, exams in a student. That's when we often see the individual have the behavior, or foreign environments seem to precipitate it as well too. There is a shockingly high number of people who come to see us, like the young woman who walked out of her dorm room when they're in hotels. It's almost like the foreign environment, the strange mattress, the funny smell, the air conditioner making a bizarre noise, the mattress not feeling right, maybe sharing a bed because you're at a conference and you're going with a colleague and you're sharing a room. All those things can sometimes sum up to that environment leading to some sort of disruption of sleep at night and the sleep talking happening as well too. Fever and illness, very common. We saw a lot of sleepwalking in and around COVID, but anything that causes an illness or a high fever can do it. We often see the same thing with seizures when somebody has an unprecipitated, has a unprovoked or has a seizure kind of out of nowhere. We wonder if it may have been provoked by, fever. So we talk to people who are at high risk for seizures, no sleep deprivation because that can precipitate a seizure, no fevers. We want to make sure we're aggressively treating fevers, etc. So, both of those things kind of show similarities across both of those neurological realms. Serotonin is often at the center of mechanisms that are thought to perhaps cause sleepwalking, and specifically changes or differences in the way an individual metabolizes serotonin. And there are other disorders where serotonin metabolism is central to the disorder. Migraines are one of them. Tourette syndrome is another. And a recent study actually looked at those disorders and found that sleepwalking was 4 to 9 times greater in that community than in individuals without migraines or Tourette syndrome. So serotonin may be partly to blame as well too. If somebody comes to my clinic and is suddenly having sleepwalking as an adult for the first time, and especially if they're a woman, my first thought is Ambien, because it is a very common cause of sleepwalking. Sleeping pills in general can increase the risk of sleepwalking. Ambien specifically is a huge cause of it. In fact, so much so that after the drug was released, there were so many post-release, um, post-release reports of Ambien causing sleepwalking, particularly in women, that they readjusted the dose recommendations for women in terms of, recommended dose for sleeplessness. I'm not a big fan of Ambien or that whole sort of family of sleeping pills. I think that the sleepwalking risk is a big one. And I'm not these are not stories to be laughed at or to be entertained by. However, they're very memorable stories. And if somebody said, "Look, Chris, let's write a book about, it's Ambien bedtime stories." The number of stories I've heard across my career are countless, and they're often embarrassing and really traumatic for the individual. A young woman goes to bed, her husband's family is visiting their new home for the first time. She's nervous about the upcoming weekend and wanting it to be perfect. She takes Ambien. At some point in the night, she'd gone to bed early. She woke up. Her husband and her family was still awake, watching some television. She came out to the living room, sat down completely naked, and her husband kept saying, "Honey, I think you should go get some clothes on." And she got very irritated with him, was yelling at him, and finally went to the bedroom and had no recollection of doing it the next day. Sexual behaviors at night. A mother walked into her son's bedroom and he was, chatting online with a group of students working on a project, and the mother kind of pushed him away and started chatting with his friends and classmates. And I said, "What were you talking about with them?" And she started crying in my clinic, and she said, I'm too embarrassed to tell you the kinds of things I was saying on that chat." She said, "I'm just going to tell you there are things that an adult woman should not be talking to teenage boys about." Another man taking Ambien was in a camper with his wife, son, and the son's best friend. Took Ambien when he went to bed at night because he doesn't sleep well in the trailer. Woke up in bed with the son and the son's friend. Quietly got out of bed, got back in bed with his wife. He said, "I could tell the next day that nobody knew I was there, but can you imagine if they had woken up? And what if I had, not had any clothes?" I mean, it was just very, very traumatic kinds of stories that often could be traced back to Ambien. So sleeping pills and sleepwalking is probably suspect number one when we're evaluating what might be causing sleepwalking in somebody. There was a really interesting study about chronic pain sufferers and whether or not they have more episodes of sleepwalking, which they seem to do. And my guess is this probably relates to anything that disturbs sleep, like chronic pain, could precipitate sleepwalking. And what was fascinating in this study was not that, the majority of people with chronic pain seem to also have episodes of sleep, or a higher percentage. I don't know if it was the majority. I don't remember. This was a 2015 study. But what I do remember is 75% of people in the study who had chronic pain said that when they were sleepwalking and in that sort of dreamlike state, they were pain-free, which is fascinating. You're up, walking around, talking to somebody, and, not making any sense, but living a life that's dreamy and kind of bizarre, but pain-free, which is really fascinating when you think about the mechanisms that control pain and the idea that we can be awake, we can be functional, walking around, interacting with people to some degree, yet not sense pain. Um, uh, the biggest question is, what do you do with, or what do you do with an individual who's a sleepwalker? Before we get to that, I do want to go over, there are assessments for it. I'm not sure entirely how helpful they are. There's a Munich assessment and a Paris assessment. At one point, they were developing, sort of an arousal assessment questionnaire. I think it's an AAQ or something like that. I don't remember. But like the Paris Arousal Disorder Severity Scale has questions like, when you arouse at night, do you scream? Do you sit up in bed? Do you hit or kick anything? Do you fall out of your bed? Go out of your room, go downstairs, go out of your home, open windows, climb out of windows, handled or moved light objects, heavy objects, broken windows, picked up sharp objects like knives, touched things around windows, ate something, or unwillingly performed a sexual act. How often do these happen? If you ever hurt anybody or injured yourself, is the gist of things. And objects, weapons, guns should be extremely thought through in individuals who are sleepwalkers. I have had several patients in my career wake up with guns in their possession. I had a young woman who woke up outside in her nightgown with an unloaded gun, but she had woken up, gotten into the closet, unlocked a gun case. Fortunately, the bullets were kept somewhere else, but she took the gun and went outside in the woods and kind of woke up outside, became conscious, had no idea how she got there nor why she was there, and she had a gun with her. So I think we have to be extremely careful. Gun safes are awesome, trigger safes are awesome, but if you are the possessor of the combination, then it's not foolproof that you will not be able to open that safe at night when the time comes. We actually had a sleep study in our sleep lab where at some point in the night, a patient woke up and had a knife in his hand and was kind of flashing it around. It turned out that he had actually brought this bread knife, this old bread knife, to the sleep lab as a back scratcher, but nobody knew he had it. And he woke up and was kind of sleepwalking with this knife in his hand, which can cause all kinds of problems, as you can imagine. So, what do we do for these people? I mean, I think safety is key. You might not be able to prevent the sleep walking, but you can certainly take steps to make that person safer. Alarms are really important. And you can buy these little simple alarms. We bought one time for our daughter when she was living in an apartment when she was in college, where you just go to Home Depot or Lowe's, you get these little alarms that have like a magnet that you put on the door frame, and the alarm goes on the door. And when the magnet separates or is spaced away from the door, it chimes, ding dong, or it goes off. Very easy to install, and you can put that on a door so that the alarm, so when you go to bed at night, you set it. So if anybody opens the door, the alarm goes off. And that alarm can alert other people that the sleepwalker's on the move. It can also sometimes awaken the sleepwalker. And that gets to, should you wake up a sleepwalker? This is always the biggest question in terms of, there's all kinds of interesting myths about not wanting to wake up a sleepwalker. You can wake up a sleepwalker, that's perfectly fine, but you have to understand that the sleepwalker is going to be extremely disoriented, sometimes combative. If they believe that they're escaping some sort of danger, you suddenly become the danger and you get struck in the face. So to me, it's being reassuring, it's being calm. And I never see this written, but I think it's important to kind of play along a little bit. You kind of encounter your loved one walking around. One time I think I've mentioned on the show, my wife said, we really need to get all these dead bodies off the lawn. We just watched some X-Files, show that had some kind of creepy themes or whatever. And so she was talking about that. So instead of, dead bodies, what on earth are you talking about? Which can happen when you don't realize the person walking around and talking to you is in fact asleep, which happens a lot. But if you know this person has a pattern of this kind of behavior, the best thing to do is, oh, sure. Well, yeah, I'm going to get the dead bodies right now. Let's get you back in bed because you got a big day tomorrow. And it shouldn't take me long to get everything cleaned up. I don't want you to worry about it. They're all taken care of. There's nothing for you to worry about. Like reassuring, but also playing along with, Chris, I think there's a lot of snakes in the bedroom. Oh yeah, but there are. I got them out and I put that anti snake spray around and I've walled everything off so the snakes can't get in anymore and everything's safe and good. Like try to slowly turn them back to bed rather than an abrupt 180. Snakes, there's no such thing as snakes in your bed. What are you talking about? Like that kind of thing can be kind of problematic. What are some things that might be underlying causes of the sleepwalking? We've talked about sleep disordered breathing, like sleep apnea. Restless legs is a big one in older individuals. The leg kicking, the periodic limb movements we've talked about is what's causing it. Sudden noises, anything that arouses somebody from sleep is fair game in terms of causing a sleep behavior. We did a study one time when I was a student at Emory Medical School. I was running a study where we were awakening individuals during certain stages of sleep to see how it affected their cerebral blood flow. So I had the C3PO robot affixed underneath the subject's bed. And so when the subject would go into a certain stage of sleep, I would push a button and C3PO would start to jabber and it would wake you up because it was so loud and obnoxious. One of my friends, his name was Jeff. Hello, Jeff, if you're listening. Jeff was a subject for that study. And when the bell woke him up, he didn't just wake up, he stood up out of bed and left the bedroom, dragging and ripping all the equipment that we had hooked on to him off of him, walked back into the control room where I was and said, "All right, Chris, well, I'm going to see you in class today. I'm going to go home." It was like 3 o'clock in the morning. He thought the study was over. And so I was at that same thing. "Oh, Jeff, it's okay. It's not even time for class. Where classes aren't for a long, long time. You have plenty of time to go back, get some more sleep." So I gently directed him back to the sleep lab room, got him hooked back up and fell asleep. But he was clearly sleepwalking when he walked into the sleep control room. Physical contact with a bed partner. So if you're in a small bed and you're moving around a lot, you might be disrupting the sleep of your partner and perhaps creating more of a chance that they would have a sleepwalking episode. Snoring, even without sleep apnea, can be a precipitant. So if you've gone to a sleep lab and said, "I sleepwalk," and they say, "Well, let's do a sleep study and see what's going on," and they come back and say, "Okay, well, you don't have sleep apnea." Great. Did you snore? Because treating just the snoring in your case could dramatically reduce the chances of you having sleepwalking. And everybody snores. I mean, not everybody snores, but a lot of people snore. So remember, not having sleep apnea is not the same as not having some form of disordered breathing like snoring. Alcohol intake is a big one right up there with the Ambien and sleeping pills. Acid reflux. The acid reflux is happening at night, more likely to happen at night because we're lying flat. And that reflex is awakening you and causing you to have your sleepwalking. Sleeping with your head elevated, couple extra pillows or a wedge, or if you have an adjustable bed, raise it up. Do you have as many sleepwalking episodes when your head is raised than if your head is down? Certain foods might be kind of on a list as well too. Um, and then in terms of what we do about, there aren't any medications that are FDA approved to treat sleepwalking. Gabapentin, clonazepam are often used kind of as last resorts, but can be effective. I think it's really important about making the environment safe, closing doors and windows and making sure they're securely locked, closing shutters if you have them, making it tricky to get a window open. Because usually, these individuals can get up and walk around, but they're not the most coordinated and dexterous and oriented to problem solving at night. I think it's always important for individuals who are sleepwalkers to sleep wearing some form of clothing. It's not that they can't take it off, and they often do, but at least if they walk out of the house or the hotel room, which is where I feel like 90% of sleepwalkers come to our clinic because they were on a trip, they were in a hotel, they walked out of the hotel room without their key card, naked or wearing very little clothing. The door locks behind them and they're staggering, walking around confused. And some Samaritan always finds them, puts a blanket around them, and tries to figure out where they're from. And it's such a shocking, traumatic ordeal that they come to see me after that. Zero bunk beds. Nobody who has episodes of sleepwalking should sleep in the bunk bed. So if you have a child who's a sleepwalker, they're heading off to Camp Sleepaway, they do not get to be on the top bunk, which sucks because one of my favorite things in the world when I was a kid was to sleep on the top bunk. I was one of two children. We even had bunk beds in a little cabin that my parents had in West Virginia. And guess who always got the top bunk? This guy. Wasn't even a question. So it's fun sleeping in a top bunk, but it's also dangerous if you're a sleepwalker. Putting some lights on so if they are walking around at night, they can kind of see what's going on. If you are a parent, never strap your child to a bed. It seems like a good idea, or lock them into their bedroom. That is not a great way to handle the situation. And, kids could get hurt or even strangled if you did that. Speak quietly, be reassuring, and do your best. We talked about hypnosis in episode 106. There are some, reports of hypnosis being beneficial in small series. Or even if you have an individual who sleepwalks pretty consistently, having a forced awakening about 15 minutes after they fall asleep or prior to when they generally have their first episodes of sleepwalking, which, because they occur during deep sleep, usually happen kind of early in the night. So doing something like that can be helpful as well too. So that's it. Sleepwalking, somnambulism, noctambulism, done and dusted. Do you have episodes of sleepwalking? What's your craziest sleepwalking story? Have you found things that we didn't talk about in this episode that have been helpful for your sleepwalking? Let the show know. Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Twitter. Check out our YouTube page where you can find videos of all of our content. Find us on Spotify. You can not only find the podcast on Spotify, but we have the Spotify Sleep Unplugged music playlist, volumes 1, 2, and 3, and we'll add a few Elliott Smith songs to volume 3. And until next week, sleep well.